Hey, I'm Stephen Good for, just for my college classes of Technology Management 272 and 274. I got right here my PS4 hooked up and it's controlled, and I'll take the phone over to show you the network of when we're getting onto that and whatnot. But I am here to crimp cable. I crimped a lot of cable when I was in the Navy, and right now my PS4 is connected through the internet just by a bought cable and whatnot. It's all good and working fine, and I actually feel a little bad about ruining it because they did such a well done job of making the cable very well loose so it wouldn't get crimps and whatnot at least at the end. So cutting off this end is going to make me a little sad, but what can you do? Got an assignment, so got to do it. So basically, when you're first crimping out a cable, I don't really want to cut off too much. Normally you just use it so that when you have all this excess cable rolling around in places you wouldn't want it to otherwise be at. Like, say for instance you have a 10-meter long cable but you only needed 5, but now you have like 5 meters of cable just kind of around you. It's better for that. Most crimpers come with like this little section where you can easily peel off the actual wiring. Though I never actually like using that. I like using the blade itself, but that's just how I was taught, so that I'm delicate and careful with it. In short, once you get this rubber off and you do a cut, but not too deep, you're going to be left with some wires. Now, this isn't shielded pair or anything, luckily. Well, I mean, the rubber makes it kind of shielded, but it's not like got foil in it or anything like that, which normally makes things more and more difficult. This is actually giving me some trouble. The rubber's so good. Alrighty. There we go. So you're kind of left with 4 individual pairs of cable: orange, blue, green, and brown. Put it up here real quick. First thing you do is kind of separate them best you can, because we're going to be trying to line these up pretty soon. The reason being that you want these separate and you want them very thin if you can. Get them very nice and working. Try to like keep them very stiff. They come naturally curled, and you want them not to do that for what you're about to do. So you just go by each one of these things, unwind it and unpair it off with its little buddy. You got striped and unstriped. And then you'll be able to go ahead and take care of this relatively easily. I had to do this quite a bit. You'd be surprised on how often like Ethernet cables would just go bad. At least on the ends, users would sometimes keep unplugging and unplugging their Ethernet cable as if they're troubleshooting on their own, despite the fact we tell them not to do that. But they'll unplug and replug in the Ethernet cable over and over, and they'll put it sideways, they'll put it upside down, they'll mess it up. Never underestimate the ability for just a random Joe to just mess up your connections. It'll happen all the time. And you'll have to go over into their workshop with a crimper tool, just like this one, and be expected to fix it. Now, of course, the first thing you troubleshoot when you're actually going onto a scene where someone has a network outage and their computer is on the network, you don't think it's the cable, but it sometimes happens. You'll get into a situation like that. I was in IT in the Navy for about 3.5 years, not counting my training and stuff like that. So, you end up having to do this a lot. You end up having to like do cable runs and whatnot. Now, when you got them all separated like that, now we can start thinking about what we're doing next. You buy one of these RJ45 cable connectors. They're very nice, and I just got the standard ones. They aren't too expensive or anything like that. They each got these little divots in for each one of these things. Now, there's a particular order you're going to use when putting these in on how you do it. Orange, white, orange. Man, it's been a long time since I've done this. Also, if you ever forget the actual order, like I may have just, because I always get confused whether or not it's white orange first and then orange, or orange and to white orange. No. It's, you could always look at, like, say, the crimping end that you do, because this is a standard Ethernet cable, built exactly the way you want it. So it looks like it's actually white orange. But I made that mistake. Yeah, it's been a long time since I've ever had to crimp cable, surprisingly enough. Then it's white, green, blue. Remember that. White, green, blue. Now, when you're putting over the white, green, blue, because that's no longer a pair that's together, it gets a little difficult because it's being a little frustrating. So then you go white, blue, green, and white, brown, brown. Now, you kind of get them very lined up here. Now, you're not just going to obviously shove this entire thing into your Ethernet connector. That's not how it's going to work. You need to get it really, really lined up. I like to move it around like this a little bit. Get it exactly where I want it to go. Bend it back and forth. Make it more flexible. See what I can do. And especially at the base where the actual cable is, you want it to be still just as accurate as the end. Kind of make like a bridge, a little of a line. So make sure all the cables are touching in the right order properly all the way down. Again, this does save a lot of money to some occasions, because if your Ethernet cord ever goes bad, you can fix it. But most of the time when you actually have an Ethernet cord problem, it's probably somewhere alongside the actual cord, rather than the ends. So then you just have to buy a new cable. But hey, crimping your own and buying a box of wire would save you so much money in the long run. Okay, so this is looking pretty good. Now, you're going to want about maybe a thumb's worth is how I do it. I mean, it's to each their own, how they actually want to get this done. I'm sure there's a rule on exactly how you want it, but the goal is to make sure that the cabling actually remains on the inside of your connector. Because that way you won't just have frayed cables running around and being able to be even more destructible than the last cable you just had. So then you get out your crimping tool and you're going to actually cut these at a good point. Let's see here. Always make sure and double check your wiring arrangement, because it can mess up. It can be wrong. Yep, it's all good all the way through. So now I'm going to cut this. Ooh, that didn't turn out that well, that crimper. This is my first time actually using this crimper tool. But that's not a problem, because if you cut, I always try cutting over for the first time when I cut. That gives me a lot of more room to work with. Okay, so let's see if I got this. Okay. What the heck? This is just being terrible to me right now. I'm gonna get this. Oh! So some of them come with the blades that are attached simply just for cutting off the cable, and then have a secondary blade where you're supposed to use to crimp. I made that mistake. I'm terrible. So this is the blade you're going to want to use to crimp the cable, actually, because it's got like a base that can easily use to chop. Yeah, that went out so much easier. Alright, let's see how I'm doing here. I'm going to make it a little shorter so that I can make sure that that cable remains in play. Okay. How's it looking? Yeah, that's good, that's good. So then you just kind of ease it slightly into it. Make sure all of the cords and connections at the end of the thing are going all the way in. Get it as in there as you can, and always confirm visually that all of the pieces are in place. Alrighty. Looks good when it's all lined up, and you can kind of notice at the ends that there's a shining. I don't know if you could see that well. I'm using a phone because I'm a cheap little college student who doesn't have access to good cameras. But all of your ends should be at the end there. You should be able to see a little copper filament. Alright. And once that's done, go ahead and put in the actual hole of the crimping device. Squeeze it. Have it come out, and you should be, if you did it correctly, a well-done crimped Ethernet cable with the, remember to try to get the wiring over at the base so that it won't be more easily broken. So we're going to pop this thing over into my PS4 because I don't actually have a computer that has a working NIC card right now. I've been using everything wirelessly. Not so much NIC card, but working Ethernet port. So PS4 is the only thing that I got to prove that I got this cable working. So I'm going to go ahead and move this on over to my network setup page. Oh, gotta switch that. Yeah, we'll just do it like this. So we get out my controller and go ahead and test my Ethernet connection. And bam! Got it working. So that's Stephen Todd Good of his various college classes teaching you how to crimp cable. Oh, and one thing I forgot to mention, I use a T568A pattern because that's the standard that we use for nearly every Ethernet cable around. The reason I'm using it is because I just want a standard Ethernet cable and I have no need of a crossover cable because everything I can do with nearly everything on my personal internet network, I do not need a crossover cable for. The only time I'd ever use a crossover cable is if I actually had a giant modem connected to 1,000 different devices and I needed to fix something with IP addressing or do it crazy. I used like a crossover cable in the Navy a couple times when I was operating on giant switches and backbones, but there's no reason to do it for my household because I don't need to edit my network to that degree. Anyway, this is Stephen Good from my various college classes signing off.